Have you ever felt trapped, as if the universe were against you? As if every effort you made was in vain, and your only option was to give up? There's an ancient truth that resonates in the wisdom of many cultures, and Buddhism teaches it too. Where there's a will, there's a way. This doesn't just mean stubbornly persisting in something, but rather finding a purpose so clear that no difficulty can deter you. Imagine that, just like a small seed sprouting amidst concrete, our inner strength can flourish even when everything around us seems to crumble. But is true will enough? What happens when that strength arises not from selfish ambition, but from something greater, like gratitude? Believe me, you are about to hear a story that will touch your heart. A story of a wounded elephant, a group of humble carpenters, and a twist of fate that none of them could foresee. In a dense forest, where the trees whisper to the wind and the river flows lazily, a majestic elephant walked silently. He was large and strong, but on this day, every step was torture. A sharp acacia thorn had pierced deep into his foot, and the pain was unbearable. Tired and exhausted, he heard the sound of hammers echoing in the forest. In the distance, a group of carpenters was working, cutting wood and building structures for houses. The elephant, desperate for relief, felt a glimmer of hope. With the little energy he had left, he dragged his massive body to the camp. There, under the astonished gaze of the men, the elephant collapsed to the ground, letting out a groan of pain. The carpenters noticed something was wrong and cautiously approached. When they saw his swollen foot, they understood everything. With patience and precision, they used sharp knives to make incisions around the thorn. The elephant, standing still and submissive, completely trusted those human hands. Soon, the thorn was pulled out and the infection began to drain away. Washing the wound with hot water and applying medicinal herbs was not just routine for the carpenters. It was a genuine act of care. In no time, the elephant was finally able to breathe without pain. At that moment, there in the middle of the forest, something powerful was happening. It was not just men helping an animal. It was an encounter between two souls. One, gigantic and wild, wounded and vulnerable. The other, simple and human, responding with empathy and kindness. The elephant knew that his life had been saved, and that his gratitude, somehow, needed to be expressed. With his foot finally healed, the elephant returned to the forest. But something had changed inside him. This was not just any farewell. He knew that the kindness he received from the carpenters could not be forgotten. Something deeper was growing within him, a sense of debt, of recognition. And in his gigantic heart, a decision was being born. He needed to give back. The next day, even before the sun kissed the treetops, the elephant returned. This time, he was not wounded but determined. As the carpenters began their work, he appeared silently and surprised them. He picked up heavy logs with his trunk and dragged them as if they were twigs. At first, the carpenters laughed. "Look, the elephant wants to work." But soon they realized he was not joking. Every day, the giant returned, not for food or shelter, but simply to help. And somehow, he became one of them. The work that had once been laborious and time-consuming now flowed with a lightness they had never imagined. And the men, in return, also did their part. Each offered a piece of their meal to the elephant. It wasn't a feast, just small portions, simple pieces of rice and fruit, but for him, they were worth more than any treasure. He ate slowly, chewing as if savoring not just the food, but the affection behind each gesture. Meanwhile, the routine in the clearing changed. It was no longer just work. There was a lightness in the air, a camaraderie. When the elephant finished helping, he would wade into the river to play, and soon the carpenter's children began to follow him. They would grab his trunk and jump into the water with him, laughing loudly as if he were an older brother. And he, with the gentleness of one who carries an ancient secret, ensured that none of them got hurt. In the end, no one spoke of debts or obligations. The elephant was not there to pay anything back, and the carpenters, by feeding him and caring for him, expected nothing in return either. What was born in that space was not a relationship of exchange. It was something rarer and more powerful, a pure connection where shared work became friendship and silent gratitude transformed into joy. Days passed, and the great elephant began to realize something inevitable. Time waits for no one. His back was arching more, his steps slower. He knew that no matter how much he wanted to stay by the carpenter's side forever, that moment could not last. But he wasn't worried. He had already made a decision. One quiet morning, while the sun was just stretching its first rays over the forest, the old elephant departed alone. His steps were firm, even though his heart felt heavy. Without saying a word, he led his son to the clearing where the carpenters lived. When they arrived, the men stopped what they were doing and looked at each other in confusion. The father elephant walked calmly up to them and, with a serene and deep gaze, presented his son as a gift. "You saved my life. Now I give you what I hold most precious, my son." Then, without ceremony, the old elephant turned around and walked into the forest. He did not look back. He knew his son would understand. He knew he was ready. The carpenters watched in silence as the giant disappeared among the trees, his enormous figure dissolving into the green shadows of the forest. And the young elephant, though still so young, immediately assumed his role. He didn't need explanations. He knew it was his time to carry on his father's legacy, his time to show through actions what gratitude really means. At that moment, as he held the first rope to help the carpenters measure a board, he felt a new weight. But it was not an unpleasant one. It was a weight that came from a mission greater than himself. And with each step he took, each log he moved, and each task he performed alongside those men, the young elephant honored his father's choice. Because, in the end, gratitude doesn't end when we repay what we have received. It continues, passed down from generation to generation, as a silent promise never to forget those who helped us rise when we needed it most. Days continued peacefully in the forest, with the young elephant working alongside the carpenters as his father had done. The friendship between them was as natural as the current of the river that wound beside the clearing. But what no one could have imagined was that this small piece of the world would soon attract the attention of a king. It all started with a simple piece of dung. One day, after his bath in the river, the young elephant, following his noble instincts, took care of his needs on the bank, as he always did. The rain from the previous night carried part of that dung downstream, where it got caught in some bushes near the city of Benares. That same day, the king's keepers took the royal elephants for a bath in the river. But something strange happened. As they approached the water, all the elephants suddenly stopped. Their large ears perked up, and their bodies trembled. A different smell, an unfamiliar aroma, stirred a mix of respect and unease within them. It was the scent of noble elephant dung, an unmistakable sign of greatness. The keepers tried to push them into the water, but it was useless. One by one, the elephants raised their tails and refused to enter the river. When the keepers discovered the source of the smell, they realized that a special elephant lived somewhere upstream. The news quickly reached the palace, and the king himself, intrigued, decided he needed to see it for himself. So, with a procession of boats and drums, the king ascended the river to find the clearing where the carpenters worked. And there he was, the young elephant, joyfully playing in the water, as if the world beyond the forest didn't exist. As soon as he heard the sound of the royal drums, the elephant emerged from the water and walked calmly over to the carpenters, positioning himself beside them as if to say, "These are my people." The king disembarked and greeted the carpenters with a smile. "Why didn't you send someone to tell me you had such a special elephant? I would have come personally long ago." The men laughed and replied, "Your Majesty, he is not just an elephant. He is our friend." The king gazed at the elephant for a long moment and then made his offer. "This elephant belongs to the nobility. He must come with me to the palace. He will be treated as he deserves and will live among the great." But the elephant, as everyone there knew, was no ordinary animal. He did not move on command. His deep eyes met those of the king, and calmly, he remained by the carpenter's side. It was as if he were saying, "I will go, but only when you take care of my friends." The king understood. With a smile, he ordered bags of gold to be distributed among the carpenters, and each received more than they could ever imagine. The wives were given fine clothing, and even the children who played with the elephant were gifted. Only then, After each person he loved had been properly honored, did the young elephant step forward and lower his head slightly, accepting the king's invitation. And so, the great elephant left with the royal procession, not as an animal to be tamed, but as a friend who knew his mission there had come to an end. The river, the forest, and his old companions were left behind. But something remained, invisible to the eye, a silent promise that wherever he went, he would carry with him the memory of the kindness he had received and returned with all his heart. In the days that followed the elephant's arrival at the palace, the kingdom of Benares flourished. The young elephant became the king's most loyal companion, a symbol of loyalty and greatness. But as with everything in life, peace does not last forever. Then, the inevitable happened. The king, with whom the elephant had formed such a deep bond, suddenly fell ill. Days later, he passed away, leaving a kingdom without a leader and a pregnant queen awaiting a child yet to be born. With the king's death, a shadow of uncertainty hung over the palace, and like vultures circling their prey, enemies began to approach. From the neighboring kingdom, the powerful king of Kosala gathered his troops and marched toward Benares. The throne is empty, he thought. This is my chance to take the city. And so, with immense armies, he surrounded the walls of Benares, threatening to destroy everything if the people did not surrender. Inside the palace, the situation was desperate. The queen, with her baby still in her womb, pleaded with the ministers for a deadline. "Wait 7 days," she said to the enemy, "and if I give birth to a son, we will fight for our kingdom. If not, he will be yours." The king of Kosala, convinced of his inevitable victory, accepted the agreement and waited. But time was running out, and the people of Benares were lost in fear and uncertainty. Without a leader to guide them, each day felt like an eternity. The walls that once seemed impenetrable now appeared fragile before the enemy's army. Meanwhile, in the heart of the palace, a secret was being kept. No one dared to tell the elephant about the king's death. They knew the bond between them was too strong, and they feared that the pain of losing his friend would be unbearable. "If he finds out the king is dead," the guards whispered, "his heart might break." But with the enemy at the gates and the strength of Benares' army dwindling each day, the moment came when hiding the truth was no longer an option. On that silent morning, the queen, bearing the burden of sorrow and hope, made a courageous decision. She held the unborn child in her womb, dressed in simple clothing, and walked to the stable where the elephant rested. With a gentle touch on the great animal's trunk, she whispered, "Your friend, the king, he is gone. But he left something precious for you to protect." And then, carefully, she placed her belly in front of the elephant and said, "Here is your friend's son. The throne is his, but we need time. The enemy is at our door, and you are our last hope. Either you fight for him, or we all shall fall." The elephant stood in silence for a moment. His large eyes were fixed on the queen and the new life she carried. Then, something powerful happened. As if a flame ignited within him, he lifted his head and let out a roar so powerful that the palace walls trembled. The roar echoed like a promise that, as long as he was there, that kingdom would not fall. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the stable, ready for battle. The guards and ministers rushed to prepare the elephant for war, fitting him with shining armor. As the city gates opened before him, the great elephant set off, carrying not just a promise, but the hope of an entire kingdom. When the gates of Benares opened, the forest and the fields around were filled with tense silence. The great elephant, gleaming in his golden armor, emerged like a silent storm. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the enemy army awaited, confident of victory. But they had no idea what was about to happen. He advanced slowly, each step echoing like thunder upon the earth. The enemy soldiers, upon seeing the gigantic figure, felt their hearts waver. He was not just any elephant. He seemed to embody the will of the former king, a spirit that had returned to protect what was his. Then, the elephant raised his trunk to the sky and let out a devastating roar, the call of the heron. It was an ancient sound, a kind of warning that cut through the battlefield like lightning, making the ground tremble beneath the enemy's feet. Men and horses quaked, Many dropped their weapons, as if the very air around them had become too heavy to bear. It was a sound that not only announced his arrival but declared, "I am here, and I will not back down." Without hesitation, the elephant charged against the enemy line. Like a force of nature, he advanced, toppling everything in his path. No man or barrier seemed able to stop him. He carved a path through the troops like wind through dry leaves, scattering barricades and terrifying soldiers. But what was most impressive was not his strength. It was his precision. He did not kill indiscriminately. He simply pressed on, focused on a single goal, reaching the enemy leader. And then, he saw him. The king of Kosala, mounted on his horse, surrounded by guards, giving orders as if victory were already guaranteed. The elephant roared again, and with impressive force, he broke through the final barrier. Before any guard could react, he rose on two legs and seized the king by the topknot with his trunk. The battlefield froze. Soldiers on both sides stood in silence, their eyes fixed on the surreal scene. The enemy king, once imposing, now swayed helplessly in the trunk of the elephant like a disobedient child being punished. Some Benares soldiers prepared to strike and end him right there. But the elephant, with a firm gesture, stopped them. Instead of crushing his enemy, the elephant did something unexpected. With a serenity that was almost spiritual, he walked back to the city gate, still holding the king in his trunk. Upon arrival, he gently deposited him at the feet of the queen and the ministers, without violence but with a silent warning. Do not underestimate the strength of a kingdom that unites. The king of Kosala, humiliated and defeated, was set free. The elephant didn't need blood to prove his victory. He had already won. Not just the battle, but the fear, arrogance, and doubt that had surrounded the throne of Benares. And there, before the city gates, under the emotional gazes of the people and the children who once played with him, the elephant bowed his trunk in a gesture of respect to the queen and to the future king yet unborn. The war was over, and once again, the silent strength of gratitude and loyalty had saved the day. The battle was over, and the defeated enemy returned to his kingdom without even looking back. The city of Benares was saved, and the peace that had once seemed a distant dream now reigned over the streets and walls. But in the midst of all the celebrations and relieved smiles, there was one figure who stood out. It wasn't the new king, nor the generals. It was the elephant. Back at the palace, the great hero was welcomed with honors befitting a monarch. The people decorated the streets with flowers, and children sang in his praise as he walked through the city. However, for him, victory was not a reason for pride. He had not fought for glory, nor for rewards. He fought for loyalty, for love, and for the promise he had made to the former king. Upon arriving at the palace, the queen approached the elephant with tearful eyes of gratitude. In her arms, the newborn prince, the future king of Benares, lay peacefully. She placed the small child at the elephant's feet and whispered, "We owe you everything." And there, in that intimate moment, the elephant gently bowed, touching the prince with the tip of his trunk, like a seal of silent commitment. But the story doesn't end with coronations or celebrations. The true ending came days later, when the city had returned to its routine and the applause had faded. The elephant, true to his nature, walked silently to the palace gates, unnoticed by anyone. He had fulfilled his mission, and now he felt it was time to depart. The guards watched him, puzzled, and asked, "Where are you going? Now this is your home. The king offered you half the kingdom." The elephant paused for a moment and looked at them with the calm of one who carries a wisdom greater than that of men. He didn't need gold or titles. What he wanted, and always wanted, was something no treasure could offer: the peace of knowing he had repaid everything he had received. And so, without farewells, he returned to the forest, where the trees whispered to the wind and the river continued its course, unperturbed. Each step he took away from the palace was light, free from any burden or regret, because deep down, he knew that his greatest reward was not in what he had received, but in what he had given. The city of Benares would never forget him, and every year, on the riverbanks, children would run and play, telling the story of the elephant who saved a kingdom not with strength, but with gratitude and loyalty. And so, the lesson of that elephant became forever etched in the hearts of all. True greatness does not lie in winning battles, but in being faithful to what is essential: gratitude, honor, and the simplicity of fulfilling the promise of a heart that never forgets. And the forest, in its eternal silence, welcomed back its noblest son, who now rested in peace, knowing that wherever there was a promise to keep, he would always find a way. Thanks for watching. In this story, you learned about the Buddhist parable of the grateful elephant and the teaching that this text has to give us. Don't forget to click like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Share with your friends, and leave your comments below about what you thought of this story. We always bring stories with teachings for modern life.